The wind screamed through the haunted forest, carrying a cold that seemed to reach deeper than flesh. Somewhere in that darkness, Gared had seen something no man of the Night's Watch was prepared to face. 3 men had ridden north into the forest, Sir Waymar Royce, Will, and Gared. They were brothers of the Night's Watch, sworn to guard the realm from whatever lived beyond the wall. They found the wildlings first. Their bodies lay abandoned in the frozen wilderness, and the silence around them felt wrong. Even Gared sensed that something unseen was watching. Then the forest went silent. No birds called, no branches moved, even the wind seemed to disappear. The 3 men knew they were no longer alone. From among the trees came figures that were not men. They were pale, tall, and silent. Their armor shimmered like ice, and their strange blades seemed sharper than any steel. Sir Waymar Royce stepped forward. Young and proud, he drew his sword and faced the creature. Whatever fear he felt, he would not simply turn and run. Steel met the pale blade with a sound like breaking glass. Waymar struck again, but the other moved with impossible speed. The fight was no battle between equals. Will could only watch from the darkness. Hidden among the trees, he saw his commander fight an enemy that seemed to belong to another world. Waymar fell into the snow. The clearing became still once more. For a moment, Will believed the horror was finally over. But death had not finished with Sir Waymar. The young knight rose again, and the eyes beneath his helm now burned with an unnatural blue light. Will ran. He ran through the trees with terror driving every step. Behind him was the nightmare he could not understand, and ahead lay the only direction he knew, south. Gared turned his back on the ranging and south. Whatever oath he had sworn, terror had become stronger than duty. He kept moving until his strength nearly failed. The cold had already taken his ears and one finger, yet he continued south, desperate to put distance between himself and the haunted forest. At last, the wall stood before him, the great barrier of ice that had protected the realm for thousands of years. Gared had reached safety, but he had broken his oath to get there. Men of the north eventually found him. They saw an exhausted Night's Watch deserter, not a man carrying a warning from the darkness. Gared was taken south as a prisoner. His frightened words were difficult to understand, and whatever he tried to tell them sounded like the rambling of a man driven mad by the cold. Soon, Gared stood in the square at Winterfell. The people gathered to watch the sentence carried out. For them, this was the punishment of a deserter. Lord Eddard Stark came to perform the duty himself. Ned Stark believed that the man who passed the sentence should also wield the sword. Theon Greyjoy brought forth Ice, the great Valyrian steel sword of House Stark. The weapon was enormous, dark, and terrible to behold. Robb Stark watched with the solemn attention of a young warrior. Bran watched with nervous curiosity, but Jon Snow looked at the condemned man differently. Jon saw the fear in Gared's face. The man was not fearless, he was terrified, and whatever he had seen beyond the wall had clearly broken something inside him. Gared was brought to the stump. He knew the law. A deserter of the Night's Watch had only one sentence waiting for him. Ned raised Ice. The square fell silent. No one spoke as the great sword rose above the condemned man. Robb might remember Gared as a man facing death. Jon understood something else. The ranger had been running from fear long before he ever reached Winterfell. For one final moment, Gared stopped running. He lowered his head and closed his eyes. Then Ned Stark brought the sword down. The sentence was finished. The crowd slowly began to disperse. For most of them, Gared's story ended there. But Gared had carried something south with him, a warning no one understood. Beyond the wall, the darkness was moving. Far beyond the wall, the haunted forest remained silent, but hidden among the trees, pale shapes moved through the snow. The dead were no longer resting. Something ancient had returned to the frozen wilderness, and its servants were beginning their long journey south. Gared was dead, but his warning remained. The realm slept behind its walls, unaware of what was coming. Beyond the wall, the night was gathering, and the dead were beginning to walk. Beyond the wall stretched a wilderness few men willingly entered. It was a land of snow, silence, and ancient secrets. The brothers of the Night's Watch had sworn their lives to guarding this frontier. Most of the realm had forgotten just how dangerous that duty could be. Gared was no inexperienced recruit. He had served the Watch for nearly 40 years, man and boy. Sir Waymar Royce was young, noble, and determined to prove himself. He would lead the ranging deeper into the forest. Will was the scout. He knew the forest better than the others, and he was the first to sense that something was wrong. The farther north they went, the colder the world became. The forest seemed to close around them. Will searched the snow for signs of the wildlings. Every track told a story, but these tracks seemed to lead towards something far stranger. They found an abandoned camp. There were signs that people had been there, but no people remained. Something about the silence disturbed Gared. A forest should never feel this empty. Will looked toward the trees. For a moment, he thought he saw movement among the branches. Waymar ordered them onward. The young commander refused to let fear dictate the mission. They rode deeper into the haunted forest, leaving the familiar world behind. Something watched them from the darkness. They did not yet know what had noticed their arrival. Then, between the trees, a pale shape appeared. Gared saw enough to understand that they were facing something beyond ordinary danger. Waymar drew his sword. Whatever stood before them, he would face it as a brother of the Night's Watch. The pale blade raised a strange blade. It looked like crystal, yet it carried a menace no ordinary weapon possessed. Waymar attacked. The pale creature answered. Their blades met in a clash unlike anything the young knight had ever experienced. Will stayed hidden. He knew that stepping into the fight would mean facing the same impossible enemy. And then Will realized the worst truth of all. The creature before Waymar was not alone. Still, Waymar stood his ground. The pale blade moved with terrible speed. Waymar could not withstand the creature forever. Then the fighting stopped. The forest became silent once again. But Will saw something impossible. The fallen knight was moving again. Where human eyes had once been, an unnatural blue light now burned. Will ran for his life. He did not stop to question what he had seen. Gared also fled south. The terror beyond the wall had shattered his faith in the safety of the realm. He knew the oath he had broken. He knew the punishment awaiting for a deserter, but fear had become stronger than duty. Every mile carried him farther from the forest and closer to the punishment he knew was waiting. The cold had taken pieces of him, yet even physical pain could not compare with what he had seen.